Dive into the dynamic world of high school sports. Whether you're a seasoned athletic director, a newcomer to the field, or simply curious to learn more about this exciting profession, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration, education, and a deeper understanding of the game-changing decisions that shape the world of high school athletics. Welcome back to AD 360. I'm Greg Vandermade, and welcome to the fifth episode of this podcast. Today's a special episode because it's going to mark the first time that we have a guest joining us today. Got a good friend, former colleague as well from the Trinity League, who's now at Sunny Hills High School in Fullerton, California. Paul Jones is going to be joining us. Paul, we really appreciate you coming on today. Excited to dive into this podcast and, pick your brain a little bit. You're a seasoned athletic director with a wealth of knowledge. So Scott and I are really looking forward to chatting with you today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am happy to join, and I appreciate the call. I feel so honored.
Appreciate that. And, I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't do the cordial welcome of my co-host, Scott Rosenberg, here with us again today. Scott, how are we doing today?
Never better, man. Starting to get excited for the kids to be done with school, and I'm sure a bunch of athletic directors are not going to be sad when the spring athletic seasons are coming to an end here.
I think that's a good one to kind of touch on, because I always felt like a workhorse eye in the barn at the end of the day when you started to get towards that May push, and you're like, all right, doesn't matter what pops up. We're coming up on a little bit of R&R time. So, but before that, there's certainly some things that need to get taken care of as the year closes out. So what we're going to do in today's episode is kind of cover one of those topics of year-end housekeeping, if you will, and talk about coaching evaluations and how ADs can make the best decisions, not only for their program, for their student athletes, their coaches, all those that are involved in their program. So as we're getting closer to summer, a lot of decisions have to start getting made, whether an AD is going to have to coach up a coach, potentially move on from a coach. Maybe they're going to be promoting people within the department. People might be retiring. There's all different things in terms of evaluations that have to take place before the year closes out. And we're excited to have Paul join us today to give us some of his expertise, his knowledge, his background on all of this, and kind of pick his brain a little bit and, just talk through all of this. So with that said, I guess we'll just get right into this episode. As mentioned, Paul, we're going to start off simply with your approach. What is that like when you're looking at your programs and making evaluations and evaluating your coaching staff? Kind of what's your process? How does that look?
So the process usually starts over the summer. I want to be able to get a full scale of an evaluation of a coach. Summer, I'm here sometimes on campus, and so when there's practice going on, I'll pop out and touch bases with the coach, and that process continues throughout the year or throughout their season. And so, whether it's popping out to practice and then going to games, talking to kids in the programs, parents are always going to give you feedback, whether you want it or not. But, I value all feedback because as ADs, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of the times people assume that you know everything that's going on, and you really don't unless somebody tells you or you observe it. And so I welcome feedback. And so that's kind of the start of my process, is just observing. I like to watch and listen and then just inquire. I like to ask questions like, you name the sport. And we'll go through a game process of, okay, what's it look like? Is this coach making good in-game decisions? How are relationships? Is this coach a positive role model? Is this coach organized? Are they a good communicator? There's so many different factors that go into being a good coach and a good leader that people don't always understand. So that's kind of the beginning process because I want to make sure that you're not just a good coach, but you're also a good leader. You're a good communicator. You do well in building relationships. And so, we kind of have our athletic pillars that we, our expectations. And so it starts with being a positive role model, and then building up championship human beings, because that's your job as a coach. You're supposed to be preparing these kids for life. And so championship human beings, and then preparing them to compete at the highest levels possible. So whether that's Division 1 or Division 10, we want to get the max out of these kids, and so we want to make sure that they're prepared for life. So those are all of the things that I'm kind of looking at as we go throughout the year to make decisions on coaches when we get to the end of their seasons or we get to the end of the school year.
I think that's awesome, because the first thing that sticks out to me, and Scott, I'm certainly going to want your feedback as well, is during all of these evaluations, if you will, not once did I hear wins and losses come up. It was all relationships. It's how are you impacting the kids? I like championship human beings. You're looking to develop people into future leaders, getting them prepared for life is another one that you had mentioned. And all of that is really what education-based athletics is all centered around, right? We want to try and make sure that these individuals are ready for the next steps within their life. And ultimately, from an athletic director perspective, I mean, we're all competitive and we want to win. But at the end of the day, it's not the wins and losses that you're really necessarily gauging an entire program off of. From what it sounds to me is you're making sure that you've got the right CEO, if you will, for that program in place to get the right assistants in place to put those kids in a position to where they'll win at life. I think that's awesome. I think that's a tremendous approach.
Yeah, me too. Tremendous answers. I think evaluation always has to be ongoing, right? It's everyday type of conversations. You never want it to be like the I gotcha at the end of the season and not give people an opportunity to improve, work on something that they need to. Because why would you wait if they're doing something that you don't think is great? Why would you wait a whole season to give somebody that feedback? The kids are affected if you wait. So I think the ongoing feedback becomes critical. And then I think the evaluation tool or model becomes important also, Paul. I don't know what you use. Like as an AD, I sometimes argued with my upper administration or my curriculum team, or I didn't want to use the school-based evaluation model for my coaches. It didn't fit. So I had to work on like a separate one that seemed to make sense so that it would be valuable.
Yeah, that's actually what I did. So I created my own. It's kind of a hybrid of my last school, and then after reading some books, our district ADs have been going through What Drives Winning, and so solid book, and was able to pull some nuggets out of there. As far as inquiring about, how are you developing the character of the student athletes on your team and in your program? How are you developing the kids? How are you developing your coaches? And what does facing adversity look like? How do you handle it? How do you teach your kids to handle it? As I mean, being an AD for some time, we get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, we culture is what you allow. And so, what is the culture in your program? What's the culture of our athletic department? And so, as you mentioned, it's always an ongoing conversation because my goal is to be transparent and honest. Because I want you to know, hey, if you're doing a good job, I'm going to tell you. And if you're not, I'm going to tell you. Because I want to give you the opportunity to improve. Because the worst thing to do is to get to the end of the season and have to let somebody go, and you never communicated with them previously on, hey, this is where you stink and this is where you need to improve, and you didn't coach them up. So that means I didn't do my job, because my job is to coach the coaches. And so if we get to a point where a coach has been reminded and they're still not picking it up, just like any sport, if your linebacker isn't making the read and isn't following directions, it's time for you to come sit on the bench, and I'm going to put somebody else in for you. So it's really the same thing because, athletics really mirrors life. And so it's what we want our coaches to understand, what we want our kids to understand, and ultimately we also want our parents to understand that too and partner with us as we prepare these kids for life.
Love it. Love it. Um, Spot on. We should let our producers know at some point, Greg. I think we should start soliciting some evaluation tools or models from around the country. Like, Paul, you should send us what you're developing because I think others could probably use it or, like you said, change it up a little bit and make it their own.
Sounds good. I don't charge much for royalties.
You should. You definitely should. Um, Talk to me a little bit just about balancing metrics versus some of the intangibles that coaches have when you're evaluating them, almost like um, metric driven versus metric informed, or data driven versus data informed. How do you try and make both work in an evaluation?
That's a great question. So, you know, obviously you always want to win games, and so that's part of the metric system. But if we're going on a grading scale, that might be 10%, maybe. Because if you're doing the little things right and you're coaching up the kids to be good human beings and teaching them properly, you're going to win the game. The scoreboard will take care of itself if you, as a coach, and your coaching staff are taking care of the right things. I mean, shoot, as a player, and even being here at Sunny, I wasn't the best athlete, but I had really good coaches, and we got to, we won league, we went to championships, and it's the same thing here currently. We don't necessarily get blue chip athletes, but we build them and we coach them up, and so our kids are going to be confident when they take the field that they have been properly coached, and our coaches are going to make sure that they're in positions to be successful. So that's a huge part. Then, we're going to look at wins and losses from kind of that data standpoint. And what's your retention look like? Are you retaining kids, or are kids jumping ship? Are people wanting to come and be a part of your program? I mean, we had a situation where, a coach left, and I'll say this is in my coaching career, I've had this experience where a coach left, and we had kids quitting the team, and we had a coach leave. And as soon as that coach left, kids were trying to join the program, and so that speaks volumes. When kids don't want to be around you. And I talked to our coaches about, how do you want to be remembered? What kind of legacy are you leaving? Because this is such an impactful time for our students. Your teenage years are always going to remember it. And so how do you want to be remembered, and what kind of impact are you going to and legacy are you going to leave on these kids? So when it comes down to evaluating, we are looking at data as far as, is your program growing? Is your program shrinking? What's that look like? What does your culture look like? What do your wins and losses look like? Because ultimately, we want to make sure you're doing all of these things right. But at the end of the day, the outside world is looking at wins and losses, and they are looking at, are you hanging championship banners? And you could have the greatest coach in the world, nicest person, but if you're not winning, you might have a hard time attracting kids to your program. Similar to collegiate recruiting, I mean, shoot, now this day and age in high school, it's very similar. And so you kind of have to have that, whether it's a private school or a public school, you have to have that right fit or that right pitch for that student athlete and their family um, to want to come to your school. I mean, I remember being on the private side, and you have families showing up and saying, "Oh, you know what? You guys do this very well, and you do this very well." Um, you know, I was at a Christian school, and you guys champion Jesus, and we love that. But then they end up at another school, and we're like, "Well, hey, wait a minute. You said that Jesus was the most important thing. Clearly it's not, because you went over there you went to modern day to go play football." So, like, all right, that's cool. Or you went to Bosco or somewhere else. And I'm not saying they don't champion other things, but obviously they're the best two football programs in the nation. And so, they win a lot, and that attracts people. And so some people just want to be a part of the team and stand on the sidelines. And so those are some of the things that we look at, because, like I said, if you win, people will come. And if you also, or if you're doing a good job as a coach, you will get kids to come to your program. But in this day and age, you might not get that blue chip athlete. So those are some of the things that we look at. But really, the biggest things are, your relationships with the kids and the community. That's the biggest. Like, are your kids gonna run through a brick wall for you, or are they coming to my office saying, Coach Jones, you got to get rid of this guy? Like, are kids boycotting practice? Like, that has happened, where kids are like, we're not going to practice today. Like, okay, tell me why. All right, I think we might have to make some changes. So those are
Love that.
things we look at.
Greg, first of all, there may have been some West Coast bias in that statement about the top two football teams in the country. Just gonna we'll throw something out there at both of you. I love that, Paul. And in the end, there's that personal touch, and metrics can't measure everything. So you've got to have that gut feeling and that kind of stuff. I feel like at times when you're evaluating coaches.
I completely agree with you there. I mean, like there is there is the level of wins and losses playing an importance into the program, right? Because regardless if you're public or private, it's gotten to the point where you have to market your program. And your program is only going to be marketable if you have some sustained success. And I think that the topic that you touched on in terms of like retention, that's important. You know, that's a way in which you can really kind of gauge, is the coach being successful? Are people interested in their program? I know that's not always going to be the end all be all because there's certain circumstances outside of their control. But if you see a mass exodus, that's probably a signal of something, which I think brings us into a good segue to our next question, which you touched on a little bit. You know, student athlete feedback when it comes to coaching evaluations. You know, how important is that, and how much of a role does it play in your overall evaluation of a program?
It's important. So something that we started doing was bringing in seniors at the end of their season. So bring in seniors and say, all right, lay it on me. I'm fortunate and blessed to have good relationships with our students, and so they're comfortable with being honest with me. And so, we'll bring in seniors and say, you guys can be honest. You're not going to get in trouble. And typically, when you're a senior, you're like, I can't get in trouble anyway. I'm almost out of here. So they don't have a problem being honest usually. But we have a bunch of great kids here, so sometimes they need permission to be honest. And they give me their honest feedback on, like I said before, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we really appreciate it because sometimes, like, I don't know. And sometimes coaches don't know about, there's an internal culture or some kids who are cancers that you might not have any idea. Um, I was talking to a coach who was telling me, man, I'm kind of glad that that parent is gone. He was terrible. And some of the kids on the team said, well, it wasn't just the parent, it was also the kid. And we would have had no idea because, up front to us, he's a great kid. So that's important to us. And then, we have also experimented with just sending out surveys to students, top to bottom, and, garnering their feedback. And so we'll go through that and, try to find some areas where we can make improvements. Sometimes coaches are doing a great job, and, sometimes the complaints come down to playing time, which, it is what it is in this day and age. Either, if you're on freshman and JV, you can look forward to possibly getting an opportunity to play. But when you get on varsity, that is not the case. It's not rec ball. It's not NJB. So, we're trying to win ball games. But yeah, those are usually the feedback forms that we go with, and we definitely value student feedback because it's their experience. And so if you have a large group of students or, your whole senior class, and they're saying the same thing, coach is unorganized, coach is always late, we have surprise practices that we didn't know about or planned for all the weekend. Those are some red flags that it's like, okay, hey, this is great feedback for us to know so that we can go in and coach the coach up so that we can be more successful in the future.
I think that's awesome. You know, I think that's great because one, you're accepting the student athlete feedback. You're looking at your seniors who've probably for the most part been through the program from the inception of their high school career through the conclusion of it. So they're going to be able to give you a full landscape view of what's taken place, what their thoughts were. And I like how you said, it's ultimately their experience. You're right. You're spot on with that. It's ultimately the high school student's experience within the program. And it gives you some good visibility because I think all three of us have probably come across one of those student athletes where you're like, man, that is just a great kid. And then you hear something, you're like, wow, they really pulled the wool over my eyes on that one. I had no idea. So I like the evaluation process and being able to put those surveys out, to your programs and allowing some internal visibility that maybe you're not privy to. So that's fantastic.
I like the addition by subtraction reference that you said, right? Like sometimes by losing, you're actually winning. Some kids and parents and things like that, no doubt. And surveys, yeah, I mean, there's a number of companies that put them out that I'm aware of, and there's also just good old like Survey Monkey or whatever else that you can use to gather that data. So appreciate that answer. Change gears a little bit on you. Anything tough about evaluating certain sports over others? Maybe it's your comfort level with that sport, or maybe it's just like, man, you have fencing in California? Because if anybody wants to try and explain fencing to me after watching it for probably 15 years and trying to figure out, like, there was no way I could evaluate a coach on the technical side of that sport. It had a lot more to do with those other things. So talk to me a little bit about that idea.
That's a great question. I'm going to disappoint some people because soccer is not my favorite sport, and so you any other sport outside of soccer, um, you know, I could probably go coach, but that sport, when it comes to evaluating and formations and it's another language. I am not a diehard soccer person, but fortunately. I have great people around me, and we work as a big team. And there are some people who love soccer, which is great because I love basketball and football. So I'll go observe those, and you have soccer. But again, even it's interesting coming down to some of that because we'll have conversations, and I like to ask coaches questions. On Monday, I might ask my football coach, "Hey, okay, you did this on Friday night. Tell me about that." And so I'll do the same thing with a soccer coach. And, with football, I actually kind of feel like I know what I'm talking about a little bit. But with soccer, I'm like, really educate me. Like, tell me what you were doing. Um, and so I like the open dialogue and feedback, and I like to ask questions. And um, so typically, if you are not performing well in a sport, people will tell you and they will tell me. And so, if it's, soccer or say water polo, and I've been extremely fortunate to have a ton of really good water polo coaches. And so it's self-sustaining. But, for some sports, like I said, I like to ask questions. And, if coaches are making errors repeatedly, people will come tell you or they'll come tell me. And for the soccer enthusiasts, they will come tell me as well. And so that's that's really how I go through like evaluating. And typically if you're making errors while coaching the game, um, there might be some relational issues in there as well. And so we use all of the information and all of the data to make decisions, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, softball, water polo, golf, tennis, soccer, wrestling, you name the sport. It's a collective. And, I like to coach coaches. That's something that, I heard Bobby Bowden say in a documentary. My job is to coach the coaches on getting better so that they can coach the kids better. And so I feel like, well, that's my job to coach them up so that they can be better. And so if I see something like that or hear something, I'll go talk to a coach and just ask questions and say, okay, well, hey, this came up. Is it valid? Is there somewhere we can improve? What are your thoughts on this? And, sometimes a coach might say, hey, you know what? Well, softball, for example, because I was out there, assistant coaching, and so I've seen some situations where, hey, you know what? I think we should have bunted in that situation. What do you think? Yeah, you know what? I probably should have bunted, but I had our number three hitter or number four hitter coming up, and I felt like they could swing away. Like, okay, that makes sense. If it were me, I probably would have bunted, but we live and we learn, and we'll see what happens next time. So that's kind of how I handle some of those.
Thank you. Good stuff.
I would definitely have to say in terms of like the sports where there's comfortable levels, right? Where like it like the back of your hand. You'd mentioned football, basketball, soccer being the one where you're like, yeah, not the best. I mean, for me personally, I used to love watching it. Had some great coaches that I worked with. To this day, still don't understand the whistles in water polo. Have no clue what they mean, but enjoyed watching the sport.
It's a kick out. Why? What happened? Ball under? The ball always goes under the water. What are you talking about? I understand.
It's important,
Uh,
like when you think about, like you can evaluate the interaction. You can evaluate how the kids are working with the coaches, what the vibe feels like, what the culture is like. I had to observe Spanish teachers at times as an assistant principal in a school, and I had no idea what was going on in terms of Spanish, but you could just kind of still feel like you understood that teacher was doing a great job. So I think you get there.
Absolutely.
and I think just kind of the mention of like the vibe, the feeling within a program, right? It kind of segues us a little bit to our next question, which we've touched on quite a bit, but let's dive into it a little bit more in terms of the importance of it as it relates to evaluations. The key word catchphrase that always gets kicked around is culture. How important is culture within programs? What does that play into an evaluation? And I guess ultimately, like, how can you evaluate the culture of a program during your evaluation process?
Great question. I'd say one of the coolest things that I saw last year, we had a team visiting us for football. And so, I'm the last one at the stadium typically. You know how that is, Greg. So the visiting team is preparing to leave, and the head coach, he's outside. He goes back in. He says, "Hey, make sure you guys clean up the locker room and leave it exactly how you found it. Matter of fact, leave it better than you found it. Pick up all the trash, pick up everything." And so I was like, "Dang, that was really cool." Because you hear some coaches doing that and some coaches don't, but that speaks to the culture. And then he had the seniors stepped up and said, "Hey, okay, guys, let's make sure everything gets picked up, put away, etc." Um, I thought that was awesome, and that speaks to the culture of that program and how that coach leads. And it wasn't any surprise to me that they were co-league champs this year after kind of being one of the bottom feeders. So I think that coach's fourth year over there, and so to see that, it's like this is why they're winning. This is the character and the culture. You have confidence when you hire a coach that they know the sport. And so there's typically not too many questions in that realm, but the culture, the character, the leadership, uh, that's what we really want to know about. Because if you didn't know the game, I wouldn't have hired you. But now I need to see what these intangibles look like and how you lead. How are you developing culture? Are you allowing guys to miss practice and still play? How do you hold people accountable? I'm a big accountability person, and so I like asking that question. What's accountability look like in your program? How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you hold your coaches accountable? How do you hold the kids accountable? How do you hold parents accountable? Um, because you'll see parents chirping from the stands, and are you that coach that says, "Hey, that's enough. I got it"? Are you telling your kids that on the bench when they're chirping at officials? What does that look like? What does that leadership and that culture and accountability look like? And so that's really important to me because, like I said, culture is what you allow. And if you are allowing guys to miss practice, or if you're allowing them to get chippy and yell at officials, if you are allowing these various things, that speaks to what the culture is because you are allowing it and you aren't holding people accountable. And, you see those programs where there's good leadership and good accountability because the parents are just cheering for the kids. They've already been informed. You're not yelling at officials. You're, supporting our team and being positive. The kids know because the kids aren't chirping at officials or the other team. They're supporting their teammates. And same thing with the coaches on the coaching staff. You'll see, I saw a head coach football game. You got assistants running out, chasing or yelling after an official, and the head coach says, "Hey, I talk to the officials. You don't talk to the officials. That's my job. You go coach the kids." Stuff like that is awesome. I really appreciate that. And so when we are interviewing coaches and evaluating coaches, these are things that we look for because those intangibles are extremely important because, we live in a microwave culture, a gimme, 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 I want more culture, and it's all about me. And so when I see accountability, I'm like, yes, we need that because these kids are our kids. Like, are you allowing that in your own house? I'm not. So don't allow that crap out here either. Like, let's hold these kids accountable. And if you can't hold them accountable, if that's not in your wheelhouse, then you better get somebody on staff who can partner with you in that. And if you can't do that, then this might not be the spot for you.
No, the big takeaway there for me that I really like is the phrase "culture is what you allow,"
Yeah.
and I think that that's a big takeaway. And what are the expectations within the program that you're setting? What precedents are you setting? How are you being able to manage the relationships, not only just internally with your players, your coaches, externally with your parents? It's such a huge factor into how successful the program's overall outcome will be on that kid's life, right? What culture has been allowed. That's the takeaway for me. I like that line. Culture is what you allow. That's awesome.
I also think that kids like to be held accountable as long as the expectations are clear. They like rules as long as they know what the rules are, right? I really believe that. So from the top down, as long as you set those expectations and kids understand it and maybe even have a little bit of a part in developing those can be really important and it can lead to success as well. And then your example of cleaning up, right? You've seen some of those social media posts, I'm sure, over time when like one kid's left cleaning up the locker room or they left it cleaner. How important is it though that it's all the kids? It's not like that senior that you said stepping up after the coach said it and then watching the freshman and the sophomore do all the cleaning. It's like getting your hands dirty and every kid being involved. And that's when I think you really have the culture where you want it to be.
That's important. I mean, I had that out with softball. You know, some girls are responsible for certain tasks. You're responsible for raking the field. You're responsible for this, that. And so some girls would finish their task and then leave. And my thing was, no, we're not leaving until everything is done. So when everything is done, we break it out and we leave. Because we play games as a team, we're cleaning up as a team, everything is done as a team. So, we're not taking off because my job is done. We're going to do this as a team. So that's very important.
Love that.
Because I know the day and age, when I was playing, it was lower classmen and freshmen. You got the bags.
I loved carrying the water jug as an 85-pound freshman varsity soccer player. That was like weighed as much as me. It was amazing. Yes, sir. All right, let's shift gears. Difficult decisions. When sometimes that's why you're the boss, and you've got to make difficult decisions, and they may not be popular. But when it comes to like difficult decisions for coaches based on evaluations, what do those conversations look like from your end?
So I mean, we have conversations with first, if there's a challenging situation with a coach, I'm having conversations with them. I mean, it's you know, learning from my time in private school. It's like any type of evaluation. So you are not going to get to the end of the season, similar to what you said earlier, and turn around and say, "I got you," and let somebody go. You definitely want to stay away from that. You would like to, if you see something, you're having conversations with that coach to say, hey, here's where we can improve, and continue to follow up with that person. And if they are struggling to accomplish those improvements, then we're going to keep meeting and keep talking. And then, I'm going to be very honest and transparent and say, if you can't make these adjustments, because these are our expectations, and so, if you can't improve here, then this might not be the place for you. Because as coaches, we have those same conversations with the kids. If you continue to miss your read or miss your block, you're just not ready for this moment. This might be too big for you. So, come out of the game, take some mental reps, and let's see if you can improve. And if you can't, then somebody else is probably going to take your spot. And so, those are conversations that I have with coaches. And then there are some coaches, unfortunately, that might be popular, might have some good relationships, or, it's interesting sometimes because you can see from an admin perspective or from the ADC, you have the overarching view of what things should look like, and then parents have what they want, kids have what they want. In my career, I had a program where a coach retired, and everybody wanted this other coach. And sitting in the admin chair, we were like, yeah, we don't know about this other guy, but it's interesting. It's always case by case. You like to see the good in people, and have the best intentions and try to coach them up as best as possible. And so, with that particular situation, the families and coaches all wanted this certain coach. And so we said, well, we're going to have a conversation with this coach, and we are going to lay out the expectations, and we're going to give you an opportunity. And if you can meet the expectations, fantastic. And if you can't, that's all she wrote. And so, we did it. We went into it, and the coach wasn't able to meet the expectations. It was similar to what we thought it was going to be. But, we gave the people what they wanted. And by the end, the people were, it was like Barabbas and Jesus. Give us Barabbas. Uh, but so that was that situation. And so that was difficult because we kind of had an idea, but we, want to see the best in people and try to coach them up. And, some other times there might be people who are very liked, but they don't run the program very well, kind of like the substitute teacher that all the kids like. But, I like you because you don't hold anybody accountable and you don't make us do homework. I love that dude. Like, of course you do, but you don't win games. Your culture sucks, and like everything is in disarray. And so you got to go. And that's not going to be the popular choice, but it needs to happen. And so I've had to have those conversations with coaches, and parents come in, and they're up in arms, and parents don't see everything and don't know everything, and you can't tell them everything. And so, you know, that kind of sucks sometimes, but we're in the seat because we can handle it. And so, yeah, sometimes those tough conversations, have to be had. But I like to have them in the beginning. I call them iron sharpening conversations because iron sharpens iron. And so, we're going to get sharper. And if you're still dull by the end of this isn't a dull house. So this isn't the place for you.
At least I know that we have common problems throughout the entire country based on your answers. This is definitely not an East Coast, West Coast split, right?
I
It's
get it.
uh it's there. That assistant coach scenario, like I've been there too. I mean, I think sometimes it's just kids or parents don't want their kids to have to prove themselves again to somebody else. It's like the easy decision to go with an assistant for sure. And then I'll throw in probably maybe just a different way of saying what you did. Like that tough conversation should be the final conversation in a whole string of conversations that took place. No surprise, and it's just the last conversation if you have to let a coach go, not the first.
I completely agree with both of you on that front. And one that I'll disagree on, like, you guys had difficult parents? Like, huh, never came across those ever. No, but in all seriousness, I think that you hit the nail on the head where the evaluation process is ongoing. It's basically a living document, if you will, because from day one to the close of the season, it's not the call that you made on 4th and 1 in the eighth game of the year that's going to make or break your job. It's all of the little things that amount to large things. Um, going back to the culture piece, what are you allowing within your program? That's either going to determine your successes or failures. So I think that it is a good way of really kind of addressing the issues and ensuring that there's a constant dialogue so people know where they stand. And then when you have to make the difficult decision, I mean, I hate to say it, but in this day and age where there's litigious factors at play at times, you've also got to make sure that you're doing your job of documenting things, right? So I think that you put it all very, very well. I'll shift us to our final question of the day in terms of ADs, kind of staying up to date in terms of best practices when it comes to evaluations. Do you have any suggestions or trends that you've seen, like in the evaluation realm, that maybe some folks should take a look at?
It's kind of interesting being on the public side than the private side because as you get into the public side, there are, well, so for example, when I was on the private side, you're an athletic director, you're an administrator, you do whatever needs to be done, handle it, you're an administrator. Coming onto the public side, depending on what your contract says, you are either on a teacher contract or you're on an admin contract. So, like where I am now, I'm on a teacher contract, which means I am not specifically, well, let's see, by the letter of the law, if you will, um, evaluating coaches. Like that is supposed to be an assistant principal's job to evaluate officially a coach. But we partner together for improvement every day. Um, and so that part is interesting. As far as best practices, I try to read. So I try not to use like the typical evaluation form, like you said previously, Scott. What a school may have for an evaluation, um, that's not going to fit for athletics. You're not necessarily talking about classroom management, or how did you teach this lesson per se, or what are your kids' grades? But I am talking about culture and communication and relationships. Playing time isn't going to be a part of that evaluation. But I reading different books, like I said, I'm reading What Drives Winning, um, from What Drives Winning to Leaders Eat Last, the Culture Code. Trying to pull some things out from those books to say, okay, how can it apply to my coaches and the current situations that we're in? And then, like NFHS has some different stuff and resources. But for the most part, I like to kind of tailor my evaluations to my style of leadership and what we have going here, and my expectations for our coaches. Like, are you upholding our pillars of the athletic department, or are you not? Like, are you cursing at kids? Are you setting a positive example? Is your vocabulary so short that you can't find any other words to use? Are you that positive example? Are you building kids into championship human beings, and what does that look like? Or are you going out and just coaching every day? And like with that, I understand there's an administrative side to being a head coach, which can be very cumbersome. And so as the AD, I try to take as much off of my coaches' plates as possible. But there's an administrative side, there's a coaching side. I know, at one of the schools I was working at, the coaches said, I spend more time doing administrative work than I do coaching. And so I like to stay away from that. I want my coaches to have the opportunity to coach, but also have time to do those little things. Like we have some coaches who are really good at implementing like leadership groups. Whether it's in football, they have rack leaders and they're working with the leaders in their program to, be the leaders and the rack leaders of the weightlifting groups, or like our girls basketball program. Our head coach does a really good job of developing the leaders on his team. So like he'll have lunch meetings with them and they go over different books and whatnot. And so, um, that's the stuff that I want our coaches to have time for, and I want to have time to be able to dive into that stuff with my coaches as well, so that we can all improve. Unfortunately, we do deal with like the litigious side, where you got to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, and you have to do all of that extra stuff. When we would love to spend more time pouring into the kids and investing in them, so that they are championship human beings who are prepared for life, so that when they leave here, they're ready to experience college and life. So I actually had a conversation with a parent because they were upset about playing time and the position that their student was playing. And I said, you have to understand that you want your student to go play sports in college. Um, it's not going to be the same experience. You aren't coming up to a coach after the game to talk about what position your student played, and you're not talking about playing time. And depending on where you go, that coach is going to curse you out and curse your kid out. And so, like, we want your student to be equipped to handle these challenging conversations and these character building moments when I need to go talk to a coach about playing time, or I need to talk to a professor about an assignment that's going to be late, or I need more time, or I have more questions. We want the kids to be equipped to have these conversations. And so I ask parents, who's going in to Chipotle to when your kid is working there, to ask their boss for a raise, and nobody
Uh,
raises their hand.
it's a good point. I mean, like I think the solid takeaway here is the evaluator always has to do self reflection and evaluating themselves and figuring out, what steps can I take personally to be able to have those best practices in place, to be able to coach my coaches, to put them in positions to influence their student athletes in a positive light. Um, Definitely some great takeaways from this conversation today.
Greg, I'm throwing in AI. Does that surprise you? For trends and that piece, like best practices, let it take you 80% of the way there with some AI, especially those little touch points, Paul, too. Like if you have to dot your I's and cross your T's, right prompt is going to have you write a perfect little letter to put in somebody's file or that, and then you just change it around a little bit for your own. So I got to throw that in.
And
Greg,
you know what, hey, Scott, I'm going to throw a shameless plug in there because I believe we did a podcast episode on AI. So if you'd like to check that out, that would be fantastic.
Paul, you've been amazing, man. Thanks for the introduction to him, Greg. Can't wait to learn more from you. Greg, happy third anniversary with the company. You had us
Appreciate that.
today, so happy anniversary to you.
Appreciate that. Well, I mean, I would certainly be remiss, Paul, if I didn't sing your praises and thank you so much for being our inaugural guest on our podcast. You did a phenomenal job today. I'm sure many folks are going to have some great takeaways to be able to go back and become better coaches of their coaches, right? So we cannot thank you enough for joining us today. With that said, I think that's going to be a wrap for us today on 8360. So we really appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you heard today, stay tuned for future podcast episodes. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from so you don't miss new episodes. And again, Paul, thank you so much for having us today. From 8360, I'm Greg Vandermade.
Scott Rosenberg, thanks again, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.